evening, dear space crew. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our panelists. Thank you to be present here today on the Space for Women show Series 5, Launching into Space, New Collaborations for the Greater Good. It's a real honor to have you all as panelists in this show initiative. Our main aim today is to talk about our perspective of the future of space exploration and how we can better guarantee a safe and evolutionary development of space missions for the future. Exchange ideas on how we see our future and the future of exploration missions together with a SpaceX Demo-2 Crew Dragon making history by bringing back human spaceflight from US soil today. We will celebrate the historic mission, the first orbital flight of a new piloted spacecraft in 39 years. In longer term, NASA also expects us the commercial crew program under which SpaceX and eventually Boeing will launch private citizens as well as professional astronauts to open up the high frontier to private sector development, including privately operated space stations. It's an honor to feature panelists today. Our esteemed panelist, Dr. Sian Proctor. She's a geoscientist, analog astronaut, and Dr. Robert Zubrin, the president at Pioneer Astronautics, and featured UNOOSAs S4W Mentor, Dr. Alessandra Pacini. She's a space physics CEO in InSpace, a new era starting today. So thank you for your contribution to this greater good for all and to be all present here today. I'm going to hand over the mic to our moderator, Bianca.
I'm super honored to have our guests. Thank you very much for your time. So as today, fingers crossed, we are really celebrating one of the most epic events of this year and in the last decade also. So we are starting now with questions to Dr. Robert Zubrin. So Robert, welcome. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thanks for inviting me.
So one of the main questions that we have, so given your backgrounds also in engineering and with your background especially in what it is space exploration, so now we are seeing that after nearly a decade from when the space shuttle was dismissed to now the Crew Dragon. So what is your view of the innovation, the technological innovation that happened in the last decades, and how this new this new joint venture between private and public space game changers basically is going to develop and open new frontiers to people and joint ventures in the future?
Well, this is a landmark. It's a terrific development. It's part of a series of demonstrations that, SpaceX, led by Elon Musk and Gwynne Shotwell, has revolutionized spaceflight in the past 10 years. Okay, from Sputnik to the moon landing, the cost of space launch dropped a lot, from astronomical costs to launch a tiny little thing to about $10,000 a kilogram. But from 1970 to 2010, the cost of space launch just stayed the same, $10,000 a kilogram for 40 years. But in the past 10 years, since the advent of Falcon 9, the cost of space launch has dropped by a factor of 5. We've gone from $10,000 a kilogram to $2,000 a kilogram. And so what the Musk, Shotwell, and the rest of the team have done is proven that it is possible for a well-led entrepreneurial organization to do things that were previously thought that only superpowers could do. And not only that, do it in 1/3 the time, at 1/10 the cost or less, and even do things that they had deemed impossible altogether, such as reusable launch vehicles that come back to the launch pad instead of being destroyed. And so they've not only introduced a whole bunch of great technologies, and by the way, a new style of doing business, because here these people are having by far the most cost-effective launch system in the world. And what are they doing? They're trying to make it obsolete by developing an even more cost-effective launch system, the fully reusable Starship. That's a totally different style of doing business than we've seen in aerospace ever. That's perhaps Silicon Valley style. Okay, but here they go. And if Starship is successful, we'll cut the cost of space launch by another factor of 5. And now we talk about $400 a kilogram to go to space. And the cheaper it gets, the more activity there's going to be, the more launches. And the more launches there are, the more launchers there will be, and the more launch companies there will be, and the more spacecrafts there will be, and spacecraft companies. And we'll start getting into the economics of mass production. So spacecraft, rocket engines, all the component technologies that go into all these things are all going to become cheaper, and it'll be a virtuous cycle that will open up ever greater opportunities. So we're living right now at the dawn of the true space age.
This is so true, because also for me, coming from a rocket science background, this is one of the main shifts. So we see, especially from the biggest players in the world, that what is really demanding at the moment is having research and development for this new innovation. So being still the constraints are mass, is the budget, is the people, is the team that can work on that one. But now kind of cutting these barriers between the public and the private, and making it more accessible, because, for instance, new investors will mainly invest into automotive because it's mass production, as you said, rather than innovation into spacecraft because return of investment is too slow. But now this could really open up to so much more entrepreneurs, for instance, to so much more private people coming in. And this is also very, very important now for the audience, where we have mostly students and young professionals. So they will have a massive impact in this space exploration. So what do you think will be now let's say the roles, the next roles, the next careers that will be mainly needed for the future of space exploration?
Well, okay. So first of all, you have all the traditional disciplines, all the engineering disciplines, and the traditional roles that we have seen. And you know, since this is a conference dealing with a space for women, you know, when I went to college in the 1970s, the number of women in engineering were less than 1% of the engineering students, about half of 1% actually. Now it's more like 30%. Okay, now why not 50%? But not only that, okay, within the engineering fields, there are some that are more favored by women than others. I would say there's a lot, the women are perhaps 50% of bioengineers, but maybe only 15% of aerospace engineers. And I think it may be that there are gender differences in preference of the kind of stuff that interests people and want to do. But I think that, well, in addition to the fact that there are going to be more women aerospace engineers, certain other fields, like, for instance, bioengineering, is going to be fundamental to space settlement. It is the revolutionary technology of the 21st century. It is nanotechnology made real, because what is biology? It's self-replicating nanomachines. And if we look, for instance, at the settlement of Mars and all the things we're going to need to make, well, we can look at making them using traditional industrial techniques, and you can, but how about organisms that can make fabrics or plastics or artificial meat or much more productive crops, because it's going to be limited to greenhouse agriculture. You know, these sorts of revolutionary biotechnologies are going to be fundamental to the human settlement to space, and I think it's an area that women are going to lead in, actually. Now, and then beyond that, you know, just the fact that we're opening up so many more new opportunities, an open frontier always favors groups that are relatively excluded in the old world, okay? And so with lots of young new companies coming on and being born in this era instead of in the 1970s or the 1940s or the 1920s, they have a chance to start their culture from this time instead of that time. And so I think it's going to be very promising era with full of opportunities, well, for everyone, in particular for women.
Yeah, Thank you, Robert. It is indeed exciting times for everyone, because we are really saying that at the end, for a greater good, like this mission, there is really no, it's irrespective of gender or, origins or languages. It is for the greater good of humanity. And this is really the message that is here, because we as a humanity, we can do greater things if we work together. So now I would like to see if there are questions from the audience, because so if anyone has missed, Robert is going to stay with us just for the first 30 minutes. So if anyone has questions for Robert, please shoot them out now, or come live on the on our video, and you can ask the questions yourself.
No questions in the chat.
No questions in the chat. So, Ian, should we open up the mic to some of our audience? Who wants to have questions?
Barbara?
Barbara, yeah, I'm looking at her.
I would ask, so what's your opinion about Mars? What do you think, when we'll get to Mars?
I think actually we're going to be on Mars by 2030. Although you won't see that. That's not on any NASA's planning chart. It's not certainly not on an ESA planning chart or anything of the kind. But the thing that's going to change it, well, is this entrepreneurial space launch revolution, in particular SpaceX. Elon Musk says he's going to reach orbit with Starship this year. I don't think that's true. But I certainly think that Starships will be flying regularly to orbit by 2024. And we're going to have a new president elected in 2024. And if Starships, this heavy lift, fully reusable heavy lift launch vehicle, is flying to orbit by 2024, whoever's elected is going to turn to his or her advisors and say, look at this, can we have people on Mars by the end of my second term? And the answer is going to be, well, yes, sir. And well, is it going to cost hundreds of billions of dollars? And well, no, tens of billions, maybe 10 billion. Well, then let's do this. In other words, by making it feasible, Musk and Shotwell are going to make it sellable, and it will be sold, and it will happen. And then at that point, we're going to have kind of a public-private partnership, because there are certain things that NASA is much better situated to develop than SpaceX. For instance, space nuclear power reactors be very hard to develop in a private environment because of the materials that you need are controlled. But that is something that the government could develop, and a variety of other systems. We shouldn't expect SpaceX to develop the full assortment of technologies needed to explore and settle Mars. They're knocking down the tall poles, which is transportation. But then there's a whole bunch of other stuff involved in not just being there, getting there, but being there. And so anyway, if Starship is flying regularly to orbit within 4 years, we'll be on Mars within 10.
Perfect.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you. So we have one question coming from Nadia.
I might have missed a few things, but I really wanted to find out, what are the key skills do you think that are most needed for this space sector? And do you think that a university education is required to work in the sector? Because the tech is moving so fast, and I'm just thinking, is there always a need to have like a space education background? And then my third question, sorry, I've got three, is how do you support non-tech related space startups?
Okay, well, look, there are certain things that you do need a university education for. To be an engineer, you do. To be a natural scientist, you do. And these are the disciplines that have dominated space activities up till now, and they will continue to be important. But now there's going to be some new areas, entrepreneurship, okay, which certainly can be done by university graduates, but doesn't necessarily require one. I don't think Bill Gates has a college degree, or he didn't when he started Microsoft, put it that way. Thomas Edison didn't have a high school degree. And so entrepreneurship is a big leveler, and once again, I think this is an area where women can excel. Actually, most small businesses right now, the majority of them that are being started are actually being started by women. And so they don't need to have to be qualified engineers themselves. They can hire them and have them work for them. You know, if that's what it is. Now, of course, it helps to have a better understanding of the technical side, but that's just one side. A lot of business, there's a lot more to it. There's the mobilizing of the investment, there's the marketing, there's the networking. So this entrepreneurial revolution is definitely going to open up very serious involvement in space to people who don't have university engineering or science educations. And then, of course, there's another area which is extremely important, which is the message. You know, the poet Shelley said, poets are the legislators of mankind, because culture is upstream of politics and economics, okay? It is. And spreading division. I mean, look, why is Musk doing what he's doing? He's not doing it for the money. I mean, he'll probably make money doing it because he can make money doing anything. But there's a lot easier ways to make money than having a launch company. He could have started a chain of furniture stores. He could have done anything to make money, and he'd make money doing it. Okay, he is motivated by the idea. You know, Victor Hugo said, nothing can stop an idea whose time has come, because the idea recruits to its banners the forces necessary for its victory. And now, of course, it's the idea needs messengers. So writers, okay, filmmakers, people like this, these are the poets that spread the idea and that recruit the people to it. So yes, well, actually the majority of published authors right now are actually women. I know probably not a majority in film at this point, but but nevertheless, this sort of thing is very important. You know, I met with Musk in Boca Chica a little more than, well, actually 2 months ago. And, you know, he was quite clear that we need societal support for this effort if it is to succeed.
Thank you, Robert. It is so true. I mean, space so far has been so far away from reality that many people didn't even understand why it's happening, why so much fuss about space. But now that we are all getting together for the greater mission, people are starting really to come and see it and see what is the value behind all of it. So that's so really important. So now we have another question from Michal. Michal, do you want to ask yourself?
Yes. Hi, Robert. Thank you for being here. I'm an architect. I'm also a space architect, and I specialize in large-scale projects. On Earth, I specialize in skyscrapers and urban projects, and those are the types of projects which take a lot of time, a lot of years to plan and design, sometimes more than a decade. When we're talking about space architecture, we're talking about very, very large-scale projects, and I was wondering, where do you see the architect's role in the industry? Who are their immediate collaborators? Where should they start first? Do you think they should focus on spaceships, Mars, Moon, maybe all at once? Where do you see the architect's role? Because I believe that, as you said, it's kind of bigger than just structure or bigger than just survival. It's taking into consideration all the aspects of psychological, of human performance, all those things. So where do you see that in the industry?
Well, you know, of course, architects can participate in the design of all of these things, but, and you know, the Mars Society last year, we had a contest to design a 1,000-person Mars colony, and you know, a lot of it was the points for technical, economic, social things, but also aesthetics. And now we're having a contest to design a 1 million-person Mars city-state, and in there, the social and aesthetic considerations are, their weights are increased compared to the technical, although that's still, of course, everything has to work. But from a practical point of view, I think the key, I mean, yes, architecture of space stations and stuff is interesting, but I think the real serious role for architecture in the medium term is the development of lunar and Mars bases. The initial bases and early developed bases from there. Now, you know, one, can I put it this way? One advantage that men have over women is greater tolerance for discomfort. One disadvantage that men have over women is greater tolerance for discomfort. The question is, sure, you need people that can really rough it on the first mission. But if we're going to establish permanent human societies on the moon and Mars, then comfort, aesthetics, design become important. Okay, we want to have places that people actually want to live in, not simply endure. That is fundamental to the growth of humanity in space. And there's a lot of room for architecture here. I actually, yesterday, there's an article I wrote, which is on Centauri Dreams. It had a little fun with it about the idea of building Mars colonies under the surface of permanently frozen lakes on Mars. In other words, there's craters that are filled with ice. Well, why not melt the water under the ice? And now you've got all the shielding, you've got pressure, you've got water, you can grow fish. I mean, but you could even hollow out the ice caverns inside of these thick layers of ice and create cities. Or, of course, people have talked for a long time about doing this general sort of thing underground on the moon or Mars. One could create habitation settlements the size of shopping malls underground on the moon or Mars, but you probably want to have surface domes because people don't want to spend all their time underground. They spend the majority of their time underground. They've got all the shielding, but we got the greenhouses, we got the aesthetics at the surface. But how does one design stuff like this? Or even at the early stage when, okay, we land a HAB on Mars. Okay, now we're living in the HAB, the spacecraft landed on Mars. All right, well, maybe we can land a bunch of them and link them together. But okay, that's the beginning of something. But how do we get beyond that to a Mars space, a Mars settlement? How within the limits of the difficulties of construction and transport of such materials that we are going to transport, or the ability to transport equipment that can make materials that we can, we could fuse regolith and make bricks, something. Okay, but then we have to build. I think there's a real role for architecture here. But once again, if I was an architect, okay, sure, if they're building a lunar gateway, you might have some advice to give. But in terms of serious architecture, I'd say the early lunar and Mars bases is the place to focus on.
Thank
and
you,
then
Robert.
perhaps visionary stuff, Mars cities, not so much as stuff that you're going to see built, but once again, to inspire the next generation to want to be part of this.
That's awesome, Robert. Thank you very much. And I have now on this topic, actually one last question, which is coming from our guest, Sian. And because we are talking about possibility of really living on another planet, which means we have to be trained somehow to live on another planet. So Sian, do you want to come live?
Yes, hi, Robert. My question to you is the role analogs are going to play in our push to Mars. And as they're developing around the world, we're seeing more analogs, more training kind of popping up across the globe. And so how does that fit into the overall, design of our future?
I'm very proud of the role the Mars Society has had in getting this whole analog movement going. We started it with our Arctic Research Station, and then the Desert Station, and then graduates of that program established a station in Hawaii, and we have the Austrian Space Forum, which also started in our thing, and then has now developed their own program with a lot of novel ways of doing things. There's a Polish station, there's one in Israel, There's one in China, and so forth. You know, the stations that we have right now, this includes ours as well as these others that I've named, are relatively primitive. They're all being done by organizations with limited budgets. And yet we are learning a lot about how we can most effectively explore on Mars, live and work on Mars. I think we're demonstrating the utility of these things as research tools for understanding this. Because look, the most important step in any engineering program is to define the requirements. You know, it's really important to design things right, but it's even more important to design the right thing. And knowing what it is that you actually need on Mars, so that then you start spending the serious money on developing it. That's a really important thing that these stations can do. And it's my hope that through this activity, we'll inspire NASA, ESA, Roscosmos, the Chinese Space Agency, to establish their own stations, and with perhaps an order of magnitude or two higher budget. It wouldn't actually be that big a drain on NASA's budget, you know, to have a $10 million a year analog research program instead of a $100,000 a year one that we run, okay? And that means that you could do this with much higher degree of fidelity. So I view the stations that we have right now as kind of like Galileo's telescope, in that, okay, Galileo made some important discoveries with his telescope, but he did something else. He demonstrated the value of telescopes for astronomy, which previously they were just tools for naval warfare. And as a result, better telescopes were developed. So you had Huygens' telescope and Herschel's telescope, and then the Mount Wilson telescope, which discovered the expanding universe, and the Mount Palomar telescope, and the Hubble Space Telescope, you know, and greater and greater discoveries. So the stations we have now are really opening up a new field of research, and I think that it will, at a certain point, recruit the space agencies with their larger budgets, or perhaps Blue Origin or SpaceX, to establish their own research bases with their considerably greater resources.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you very much. And we are actually perfectly on time. It's 7:30. So thank you again for sharing with us your extremely valuable insights. And I'm sure that we've all gained way more knowledge today. So now that we were already starting the conversation with Sian, so I will start with you. Thank you, Robert.
Well, thank you. And by the way, if people want to know more about what I've got to say, I've written a couple of books. One is The Case for Space, which talks about the entrepreneurial space revolution that is underway now and how it opens up an unlimited future. And the other is The Case for Mars. But anyway, and one more thing, the Mars Society is going to have an international teleconvention in October. It's free. Everyone's invited. You can find out about it at marssociety.org.
Thank you very much. That's really, really interesting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Bye, Robert.
Bye.
So, Sian, now we can open up the floor for you, as we started already talking about analogs trainings. So Sian has actually prepared a couple of slides for us today. So would you like to, first of all, would you like to talk about what was your mission, and then we can start sharing your slides?
Yeah, I think, well, oh yeah, sure. Okay, so let me just go. So hi, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here to talk to you about the future of space exploration from my point of view and what's happening with the historic launch of SpaceX and Launch America. But I also am an analog astronaut, and I recently completed a mission in January called the Sensoria mission. And what was fantastic about it was at the high seas habitat on the big island of Hawaii, which Robert just mentioned. And it was the first time they had an all-female crew. And so looking at women in space and what does that mean? What does that look like? Things And so today I want to talk to you about why representation matters and how that can hopefully push us forward in changing some of the current numbers for women in space.
Thank you, Sian. We are honored really to have you with us. And I'm super interested about your slides, by the way. So let's put them up.
All right, sounds good. And let me go to my PowerPoint here and share and see if this works.
Yeah, it does.
Okay, great. And so I've already kind of said thank you for being here and having me. And what I wanted to talk about is how we can improve the numbers on women in space. And I believe that the way to do this is through looking at how representation matters. And so the first thing that we want to look at here is the number of female NASA astronauts. Luckily, it's on the rise. And so when you look at historically in this image on the left, you can see these are all the cohorts that NASA has selected. There's been 22 of them, and you can see the percentage of men versus women. And as what was mentioned earlier in the broadcast, that for the first time in the 2013 selection process, we had a 50-50 of men and women, which is amazing. But I know me and some of my other female explorers are really wondering, will this new astronaut selection class that will be announced next year be the first time that more women than men will be selected? And when we talk about representation matters, think about that and that message that that would send to women and girls around the world if more women were selected than men. And then when we come over here and we're looking at the commercial crew, again, when I saw this image, and think of it from the standpoint of a little girl, right? You look at this and it's amazing, Launch America, but what does this tell you? The first thing, if I was a little girl, I'd look at this image and I'd be like, well, why aren't there any women over here on the right side? And, you know, there's 2 here. So if I'm a female, I have a two-time chance of being selected. Whereas if I'm a male, I have a 7 times chance of being selected. And so again, images and representation, what messages are we sending to the future generation? And so there's a good explanation, of course, as to why the certain people are selected. But again, when we're talking about partnerships and opening up space for you know, the good of everyone, space for everyone, when you look at this image here, the first thing is, well, why is it no women over here, 2 women here? Well, they're all test pilots, people say. Okay, so are you telling me that we're back to the days of selection for the Apollo mission where everybody has to be military or have a military background? What does that mean? If I'm a female now and I want to be the first, if I want to be the first female on the moon, or I want to be the first female on Mars, do I have to be a military test pilot to do that? And right now, that's the message that's definitely being sent. And I think that when we talk about the future, how we can open it up, well, imagine when we start thinking about qualifying people, how do people qualify? Do you have to be a test pilot to fly in a demo test crew? And I would say no. What about women like Peggy Wagstaff, who is the national aerobatic champion, and all of her experience? Does that count? So when we think about experience and how it counts to being an astronaut, are there other ways that we should be looking at experiences out there in the world that can qualify you? What if you're a commercial pilot and you have so many hours of flight time and you've tested commercial planes, but not military? Should you qualify for these kinds of positions? So these are some of the things that I think we need to look at when it comes to opening up space and how commercial crew are selected. And when we're talking about selection, representation matters there also, because the people who are choosing who goes or gets selected, Well, we need diverse people making that call. We need women in that conversation saying, hey, you know, let's put a woman on our team. Let's figure this out. Another way is when it comes to women of color. That's particularly of interest to me because, again, when we're talking about representation mattering, and if you're a woman of color and you want to be an astronaut, what kind of images out there help you believe that that's achievable, that you can do this? And so when I look at this, first of all, a lot of people don't think about that. If you're not a Black female, you're not going to think about the fact that there have only been 6 Black female astronauts. 6 in the history of NASA. And out of those 6, only 3 have flown to space. So right now, NASA has a 50% success rate in launching African-American females to space. And so not only that, when we think about the selection process, Mae Jemison in the 80s, then it was 10 years later, at least, before the next African-American female was selected, and they chose 3 in that class. So we had 1, and then 10 years later, 3, and then it was almost 10 years later that the next one was selected, and then 7 years later, or 8 years later, that the next one was selected. So as a Black female, I would sit there and say, okay, well, there's only usually 1 spot. And if I'm going to be selected, it won't be for another probably 5 years from now. And so these are the kinds of things or messages that we're sending. Example, in 2009, I was a finalist for the NASA astronaut selection, went all the way down to a yes/no phone call with Jeanette Ebbs. And when we got down to the finals, there was the rumor that they were going to take a Black female. They hadn't selected a Black female in a long time. The shuttle was going away. And what did that mean? And so it really was, they're going to select 1, right? One of us, because now that the selection got down to lower numbers, the idea is, oh, well, we just need 1 to check off that box. And when is it going to be that we're just not checking off that box, that we can select more people of color more often, and it doesn't become this type of issue? Humanity's return to the moon, right? One of the things I love about this is that NASA has committed to sending a female, the first female, they say, and the next male to the moon. Well, why not just send 2 females? Why does it have to be the next female, the first female and the next male? I'd like to see NASA really shake it up and send 2 females. Or who will be the first female to step on Mars? I'm crossing my fingers for Jessica Watkins, because she's a geologist, she's a female, and she's a woman of color. This is a great picture, because this is the kind of thing that inspires the next generation, in my opinion, because here you had Beth Moses, and everybody remembers this moment where she becomes a commercial astronaut. But the thing about it is, she's also the trainer, the chief astronaut trainer. So when I saw this, the first thing I thought as a female was, wait, you can be a chief astronaut trainer? How do I get that job? And 2, you can be a commercial astronaut. And I was like, whoa. And if I was younger, that would really inspire me. And so again, these are the kind of images that help represent the future that we want to have and the partnerships that we want to develop. And then the last one I want to talk about is what we talked about with Robert, that NASA's already made it clear that the road to Mars, well, to the moon and then Mars, is through analogs. And analogs are a great way in which we can inspire the next generation to become astro explorers and really embrace STEM. It's not a lot of money for a country that doesn't currently have an analog site, or doesn't have a space program to create an analog site to inspire their students to pursue STEM. This is one of the examples with Poland, I think, but also just getting their citizens the flight ready for when opportunity happens. And I think that's the kind of message that we want to spread. And this is me at high seas during my last mission. Thank you.
Thank you, Sian. This was one of, probably the most fantastic presentations I've heard about analog astronauts. And, the passion that it's exuding from your words is awesome. So I think that many of our students actually got the same excitement, hopefully, because I got excited too. I want to be an astronaut, even though I never wanted. So it's absolutely fantastic. So now, because we are almost approaching to the end, I would like to give Alessandra the word as well, so she can have the presentation. And because you were both staying with us until the very end, then we will go to the Q&A with the audience. Okay? Thank you again. Hi, Alessandra.
Hello. I will try to be very quick, and I will start already sharing my presentation. Is that working? Is that working for you guys? Sure.
Yeah, we can see that. Yeah.
Okay. So thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here, part of this conversation. And I love everything that was said up to now. There were some things that I'd like to highlight here. So first, I'm going to introduce myself. I'm a scientist. I'm not an astronaut. And I don't work on the space exploration area of space, but space can be more than that. So it's not only scientists and astronauts. We also have the architect here talking today, and we also have artists. About the question about the skills, it's important to have STEM skills if you want to work on the engineer part and the space and the astronaut part, but you can also work in the area for space law, and you have the area of space architecture. So space is much more than that. And I invite you guys to research a little bit and go to the page of Space for Women at the UNOOSA, United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs, because we have like a series of information there that might be useful. So let me pass here. What I'd like to bring today is a little bit of a different perspective of the two pictures that are currently going on, and goes together with what was said just before me. So like we here have the picture of the astronauts coming back from the Apollo 11 mission and the wives waiting for them in the quarantine time. And today I took this screenshot from the communications from NASA when the two male astronauts, white, are going to be part of this historical moment of this launch today, hopefully safe. And you also have the wives here greeting them, saying goodbye with their sons. So initially you look at these pictures and you have the feeling that nothing changed in 50 years. And indeed, we do still have a lot of gender inequality in the field. So I'm not gonna repeat the numbers here, that was already said, but it's really frustrating to the little girls out there, and for all of us, our generation that grew up with very little representation, very little role models in the area. So after 20 years of International Space Station, we had the first spacewalk, all women, only like 2 years ago or last year. So that was really, that's showing that things are changing slower than we would expect and wish. So what I wanna say to the girls out there is that it's not completely true that didn't change at all, because behind that pictures of the two astronauts going to this mission, you have many more women in the background nowadays, luckily. So today we have many engineers and scientists, and also like in the factories and in different areas in the space industry working for this moment should they happen. So this is very fantastic, and I don't want anybody to forget that, because I don't want anybody being discouraged by the launching today. And what I also want to highlight here is the fact that those two wives today, they are also astronauts. So the wives of the two astronauts flying today, one of them is Karen Nyberg. She's an astronaut that went and participated in two space missions already. And here you see the picture of the missions she was involved in. And she flew on the shuttle in 2008. And also she went to the International Space Station again in 2013. And You can follow her on social media. She is awesome and a great role model as well. And the other wife, Megan McCarter, she's also an astronaut, and she was part of the last shuttle mission supporting the Hubble telescope in 2009. So this is fantastic, and that shows that actually, you know, to be an astronaut doesn't exclude the fact that you also can have a family, and you know, nowadays things are more mixed, and I hope their husbands today have a safe flight. And I will finish my presentation here talking a little bit about the importance of the representation. Again, like my history and my own story proves that, because I'm today a space physicist, and I decided to pursue the science career after watching the movie Contact. That is a movie that I recommend everybody watching, and it's based on the story the novel written by Carl Sagan and Anne, his wife. And actually, the main character in this story is an astronomer, a woman, Dr. Ellie Arroway, and they are searching for extraterrestrial signals. And this is actually based on the SETI story of the SETI mission. And this character specifically, she is inspired on the Dr. Jill Tarter, who is an astronomer that I had the happiness to meet a few years ago. And so I saw that astronomer actually working and, you know, riding her car into the observatory. And I decided that that was what I would like to be in the future. And now you have here in the picture, she was working, for example, in the Arecibo Observatory, one of the biggest radio telescopes. And that's the place I work in as well. So we can dream. If we see them there, we can dream to be there as well, and we can actually make this dream come true. So because of this feeling that representation matters, and also we need to talk about these topics in a way that the girls get engaged in. And here I want to just mention that there is no science proof that you know, gender has anything to do with your career choices. There is no gender relation with your skills. So actually what happened is that girls are not being motivated as well as boys to develop the skills that are required in the STEM and the hard science, for example, areas. So because of that, I wrote this collection of books, Girls in Space, here, that are targeting actually the age when the gender gap starts, which is like 10-year-old. So I hope the girls can actually be motivated to keep dreaming with space, because we all once just like wish to be an astronaut, I believe, and space is really engaging. And I want this power of space inspiring the next generations to be available to the girls as much as is to the boys. And I will close here introducing you to one of my friends and also a mentor in the Space for Women program from the United Nations, Jen Milzap. She's a director in San Francisco, and she made this movie, Madam Mars. And it's exactly about this lack of women in the space exploration, and the need of women being the first in Mars, and why it's important to have women part of this conversation and being the protagonists of these stories. And today we are not there flying, but I want you all remembering that we are getting there, and we need more people talking about it, and we need more girls engaged with this space in general. So that's all I want to present today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hala. That was another beautiful, beautiful presentation. And I'm sure that, you know, now besides the whole technical that we've been talking so far, you gave us a bit of poetry and magic to think about. That's so beautiful. So now we can actually pass to the questions of our audience. And again, I would invite the ones that actually have written already the questions here to come up and ask the questions themselves, so we can have a more interactive session. So I see that one of the questions came from Jazz. So she's asking if, you know, being in your 30s, you could actually still become an adult astronaut.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I just turned 50 and I completed a mission. So definitely,
awesome.
One of the things that I was finalist for the astronaut program when I was 39, and Jeanette Ebbs was also 39. So two Black females trying for that, you know, like we like to say sometimes, that one spot, that unfortunately that there's one spot, and knowing that most likely I was going to age out of the NASA astronaut selection. But it was after that, and it's not saying that NASA won't, but historically NASA has not taken a female over 40. There was one exception, Barbara Morgan, who was the backup to Christy McAuliffe. And so she officially became the first teacher in space. But if you're a female, again, they've taken men over 40, but that message again of the average age for a female, I believe it's 33. If you look at the last class that was selected, it was even younger, you know, 29, 30, 31. What does that mean? What kind of message does that send? And so hopefully that will change. And so I became an analog astronaut after the selection process when I got the no phone call. And I've been doing that ever since, and it's been amazing. And so yes, you can be an analog astronaut up until you decide not to be. And that's what's great about it.
Thank you. So we have another couple of questions, which I think could be both you know, going to Sian and Ale, because you have a very different background and you came into space from very different directions, also from very different countries. So first of all, we have Nonopa, and she's asking, she's based in Africa. And Ale, as I know, you are coming from Brazil, right?
No,
Yeah.
I'm from Arizona. Oh, Ali, yes.
Ale, yeah.
I'm Brazilian. Yeah, I was born in Brazil.
So we have a very diverse audience, and I know that we have both, we have very, very different people coming from different regions, especially Brazil and Africa as well. So first of all, did you feel any discrimination and any sexism, both of you, when you approached space?
You want to start?
Yeah.
I'll let you start, yeah.
Well, like in the science field, we are in this field specifically, I am a physicist and I work with solar physics and space weather, which is another very interesting area for space exploration, because we cannot just send the astronauts out there, exposing them to the hazards of space radiation and particles and everything without knowing exactly what's going on in the sun and the space environment around us. So like, that's actually a good point, because we are targeting 2024 to go to the moon. And that's around the moment when the sun is gonna reach the maximum of the activity cycle again. So we need space scientists like dealing with the forecast and trying to predict better the space weather for the safety of the astronauts. But anyways, when I went to this field, of course, like many times I was the only woman in the room. And I think one topic that was also like a little bit written here was the lack of senior women to hold our hands when we are in the path, right? So I think that's the worst situation we are facing now in science, because we are still a minority in the power positions in the science community. So it's still, the men are writing the calls for the proposals and evaluating the articles. There is still a gigantic bias in the evaluation of papers that we submit with the results. So if we are fighting to stop this, you know, these different weights for the women's worlds and the women's science and the men's science. So like, this is still a problem that we are fighting to clean up the area here and have a more inclusive and fair environment for the next generation of scientists.
That's so true. And now I'll give the word to Sian, because I'm sure she has a lot to share about this as well.
Well, I feel the same way that Ali was saying about having role models. Again, being a little bit on the older side, I'm a geoscientist, geology. I got my master's in geology. In my entire career, I didn't have a single Black female scientist or geologist as a teacher, not one. And so again, that idea of why representation matters, as I mentor a lot of students, I'm a community college professor. I mentor a lot of students. I mentor students who aren't my students, who just kind of reach out to me. And I realized how important and valuable that is. And looking back at my career, I'm like, man, I wish I had a mentor. And so those of you who are listening, it's never too late to get a mentor. And it's really important to have those professional conversations, somebody who has gone down the road and you can reach out to when you have those questions of how do I go to grad school? One of the biggest things for me was my parents, neither my dad or mom had college degrees. And when it came time for me to go to graduate school, this was back when you had to mail stuff. It wasn't the internet. I didn't know what the heck I was doing. And so a lot of the questions of how do I do this? What do you mean they fly people in? What do you mean you can get it paid for? I didn't know any of those things. And that's why now, you know, there is a network that is developing that can support you. And there are groups like this that now exist. And so the landscape is changing when it comes to support and getting out there and getting that support wherever you are around the world. And that's what's great about it, is technology is helping us make connections, and connections lead to opportunities.
This is so, so true. And exactly this is why we are here. And as you just said, so wherever you are, it doesn't really matter. We can all come together and become a super network and amplify also our message and our help to each other. So I would like to finish with one last question, which is exactly about those countries, so the developing countries. For instance, we're talking about Africa, we're talking about Latin America, we're talking about Southeast Asia. So we know that now the Western world, so to say, is leading, is one of the major players in space, in the space industry. It is a fact. So now that we are talking about opening up to lots of different new companies and lots of new jobs, even space tourism at some point. So how do you think, both of you, Sian and Ale, what's your opinion about empowering those developing countries and those young, brilliant minds in those countries to actually reach up to being one of the major players? How can they all contribute to this?
Well, I'll go first on that one. Analogs. I mean, creating a Mars or moon simulation in your country is one of the easiest low barriers. And in fact, we're all analogs right now, analog astronauts going through COVID, and this whole idea of what it means, you know, extreme isolated environments, crew psychology. There's lots of aspects to somebody becoming flight ready for Moon, Mars, and beyond. And so you don't need to have like a biosphere kind of facility. All you need to do is kind of think about what are the parameters that not only will help your country and your citizens become better, but also help you and them become flight ready. And so some of those things you can do as analogs. And so that's what's nice about it. And I think that that's a low entry point for nations that don't have a space program to really invest in STEM and STEAM through analogs, where they can go and live for a week or two, have students come through, have research projects, do the science, present, all of those things. And that's when you start to get, Poland got noticed because of Lunaris, which I also got a chance to live in for 2 weeks. And so who would have thought, I never would have thought that I'd go to Poland and live in an analog for 2 weeks. So that's a great way.
Awesome. Ale, what's your point of view instead?
Well, I'd like to highlight here, you guys are seeing behind us these little figures, and I don't know if everybody is familiar with that. Those are the 17 Sustainable Development Goals proposed by the United Nations. And I think we gotta always to think of space as a resource, and the benefits of space needs to be available for all, independent of the country you are, independent of the resources you have in your country to launch people to the space. And we need to remember that space is not only going outside to the International Space Station or to the moon, and not only like looking at the space from telescopes like we do in science, but also looking from above. So we have like all our technologies nowadays are dependent on satellites and data from satellites that cross the ionosphere of the Earth. So everything that happens in the sun interferes in the atmosphere, interferes in your life. So space is not as disconnected as people think of our daily lives. So that's why it's important to everybody have access to the information that comes from space, to the knowledge we have, know-how and technology developed to go to space. Now in my field, in the heliophysics, we have this new mission that was launched 2 years ago, the Proctor Solar Probe. And this mission is going very close to the sun. For the very first time, we are like probing places in the interplanetary median very close that we never reached before. But this mission was started like 20 years ago, and only now was able to be launched because we didn't have the technology necessary. So everything that is related to space, it's a different challenge. We need to develop new technologies. We need to invent new materials. So like this is like really very exciting field to work. Those fields and the skills you need to work in space, those are the skills that you will have more money in the future jobs. So that's why it's important to make it available to every girl and every boy out there from different countries, because we need to make that, you know, equal and inclusive environment for all of us.
And I think that's a fantastic closure. Thank you, Ale. And so now we are actually right on time. And so first of all, before Sian is actually closing with our iconic picture all together, do you want to share your favorite space quote?
Oh, I found one here. Sorry, I already jumped in it. But of course, it's from Carl Sagan, and it's from the book Contact, and says that for small creatures such as we, the vastness is bearable only through love. So I think space also brings this new perspective of our existence and our life on Earth. So I hope space keeps inspiring all the next generations out there.
Thank you, Ale. Sian.
And you know, I have my own quote that I like to share, and it's, let's individually use our love of space to inspire those within our reach and beyond. And so if we can all do that, then we'll make a difference.
That's awesome. So we can just say, you know, the space is all around us as much as love is. So we keep loving and being in space.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So Sian, it's your turn to close.
Thank you, everyone. This was an amazing presentation from everyone. Thank you, Sian, Ale, and everyone to join. I know we are, I think, 30 minutes out, right, to the launch? Yes?
I think so.
Hour and 15 minutes, I think.
So we're going to take a group picture, everyone, and then I'll let you go to the bigger launch when you're ready. 1, 2. Everyone turn the camera on, gentlemen.
Ladies and gents, come on.
Show your face. Okay. Got it. Thank you, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, our mentor and guest. You were absolutely fantastic.